As Pastor Rhino introduced, my name is Hee Jun Kim, and I am a student at the seminary at Samyang University right now. And I don't feel I need to introduce myself because it's not my first time here, but it's like my 50th time here. Amen. So I feel very familiar to be back, and it feels as if I was worshiping here just last week. I was happy to see some familiar faces this morning. And just past week, I met with Ranju, who is a member of this church, and we were eating together and talking. And what she said, I was surprised by two things. First is that her English got so much better during the past year and a half that I didn't see her. And she was always coming to this church. And so perhaps that is the reason why her English is so much improved. And I was very proud of her, even though I'm not her English teacher. But I was surprised for a second time because of what she said to me. She said, "Hey, your English, what happened?" And she said, "It's not as good as it used to be." And I became very self-conscious after that. But so I asked for your understanding if things don't go as smoothly. I don't know, as it used to be, I don't know. I never did it before, but please bear with if anything doesn't go as nicely. And I don't want that to divert your mind away from the content. So, I also wanted to express my thanks from me and my family for your prayers and intercession around this time last year. And when we were going through a very difficult time, and because of your prayers, we really had the presence of Christ with us. Amen. So we could feel the comfort and the power that He could provide. Amen. And so, even though it was a very dark and sad time, Jesus turned it around into a time of worship and praise and honor and glory and to glorify God and in honor of my Father. So, again, I thank you for your kindness and your faith. So I want to tell you that intercessory prayer really works. Amen. So we should do more of it whenever we get the opportunity. Okay, I'd like to jump right into the message, which is titled Jesus in the Book of Revelation. Jesus in the Book of Revelation. And if my face looks a little serious, it's not because I'm angry or upset. It's because I'm trying to, catch my breath. So please continue to pray. So let's pray one more time before we dive into the message. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your protection and guidance all throughout the past year. And we ask for your love to be continued, to be shown to us so that we can always be encouraged and strengthened. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, Jesus in the Book of Revelation. And if you remember, this is the title of the Sabbath School lesson study that we had a few weeks back. And studying this lesson, it got me really interested into studying the book of Revelation more closely. And yet, in this book, there are many symbols and details that makes you confused. And you often get lost trying to figure out your ways through those. And so today I'd like to attempt to show you, if possible, to zoom out from the trees, and so that we will be able to see this book in its entirety, as a whole, so that it'll help us on our way more easily. So first, I'd like to give a historical background of the book of Revelation. It says in Revelation chapter 1, verse 11, "What thou seest, write in a book, and send it unto the 7 churches which are in Asia. Unto Ephesus, unto Smyrna, unto Pergamos, unto Thyatira, unto Sardis, unto Philadelphia, and unto Laodicea." And what was the condition of the churches, of the 7 churches, at the time when the book of Revelation was written? The time is around AD 90, and the emperor of the empire, the Roman Empire, was Domitian. And this was a period of a fierce persecution against the Christians, because this emperor, he started an emperor worship and forced it onto the people of his kingdom. And so, since Christians could not comply with this mandate, and as a result of their refusal to comply, they were persecuted. And this is the time when John, the apostle, was thrown into the pot of boiling oil, and later sent to the island of Patmos. And whenever there was a natural disaster in the empire, the Christians were blamed, and they were arrested and asked to deny their faith. And whoever refused were killed. And so we see that during this time when Revelation was being written, the church was under a fierce attack from the outside by Satan. So that is a brief historical background of this book. Next, I'd like to present the themes of this book of Revelation. And it seems that there are 3 major themes, at least that I was able to learn thus far. And there may be more, and it's open for everyone to study. But for time being, I'd like to present the 3 today. And they are, as you can see, first is the sanctuary. Second is the history of the world, or the great controversy. And thirdly, it's written in, can you read these letters? Yeah, it's the Old Testament. And I put it in reverse for a reason, and I'm going to tell you a little later why I did that. So first, let's talk about the sanctuary in Revelation. And this is a side view, a lateral view from the south side of the sanctuary. And you can see on the rightmost corner is the courts. And you go into the first apartment, and then the second apartment. And it says in Revelation, and the sanctuary keeps appearing in this book from beginning to end, at the important points. So first, in Revelation chapter 1, verse 12, it says, John is speaking, "And I turned to see the voice that spake with me. And being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And you can see the 7 golden candlesticks in the first apartment. If you can try to find it in the picture, it's where the arrow is pointing. Next, and then you move on a few chapters in the Revelation. In chapter 11, verse 19, it says, "The temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament," which you see right here. And so what we are noticing is that as you're proceeding in this book chapter by chapter, at the same time you see that there is a progression in the ministry that is taking place in the sanctuary, from the first to the second apartment. And you go on to chapter 14, verse 15. It says, "Another angel came out of the temple." And in red letter it says, "He thrust in his sickle and to reap." And then afterward, in the next chapter, it says, "The temple of the testimony was opened, and you saw the 7 plagues coming out of the temple." And so now you see that the judgment is being started from the temple. Okay, so that way we have just briefly looked at how one of the major themes of the book of Revelation. Secondly, there is the theme of the history of the great controversy. And this one is the one that Seventh-day Adventists are the most familiar with. It tells about the history of the spiritual warfare that is going on between Christ and Satan, and the people of Christ and the people of Satan. And it reaches its climax in chapter 12, verse 17. As you can read, it says, "And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and the testimony of Jesus Christ." Okay, so since we are quite familiar with this part of Revelation, I'll just leave it at that. And next, if you remember, the third theme of Revelation was the Old Testament. But it's actually not the Old Testament just as it is, but it is taking the Old Testament, and the book of Revelation is tracing it back in reverse order, all the way back to Genesis. Let me show you that. In chapter 22, verse 1, at the final chapter of this book, it says, "There is a river, a pure river of water of life that comes out from the throne of God," which you can also notice in the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verse 10. It says, "There is a river that went out from Eden to water the garden." You also see in verse 2 that there is a tree of life which bear 12 manner of fruits, which is also found in Genesis chapter 2, verse 9. It says there is a tree of life. And so we see that God is restoring all things back to where it was in the beginning. And so let's keep those themes in the back of your mind as we move on to read about Jesus in Revelation chapter 1, verses 12 through 14. Why don't we read these verses together? Ready? Begin. "And I turned to see the voice that spake with me. And being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, one like unto the Son of Man, clothed with a garment down to the foot, and girt about the paps with a golden girdle. His head and his hairs were white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were as a flame of fire." So it's a picture of something like this, probably, that these verses are describing about Jesus. But it's not merely giving us a visual picture of Jesus, but it's giving us more than that. It's actually trying to convey to us a meaning that is behind this description of Jesus. Let's look at them one by one. In verse 13, it says, Jesus was wearing a garment that was going down all the way down to his foot, and he had a golden girdle. This are the clothes that used to be worn by the priests in the Old Testament. In Leviticus chapter 8, verse 7, and Exodus 28, verse 8, you can confirm it. The priests are wearing the robes and the girdle is made of gold. And so this verse seems to be telling us that Jesus, one office of Jesus is a priest. But there is another aspect to this kind of dress, and that is found in Isaiah chapter 22. It says, "And I will clothe him with thy robe, and strengthen him with thy girdle. And I will commit thy government into his hands." And at the end it says, "For a glorious throne to his father's house." And so it's talking about a king. A king is wearing this kind of dress. And so now we see that Jesus is not only a priest, but he's also a king. Thirdly, in the next verse, it's now describing his physical appearance. It says, "His head and his hairs were white, like wool, as white as snow." Which you can also find in the Old Testament. So we're really going through this book of Revelation using the Old Testament, every part of it. And so in Daniel chapter 7, verse 9, it says, Daniel is saying, "I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit." This is speaking about God the Father, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. And so this verse is telling us that Jesus is not only a priest, he's not only a king, but he's also a God. He is God. And so now that we have at least three of the roles and the work that Jesus is doing right now, now we can match that with what seems to be the three themes of the book of Revelation that we saw at the beginning. And these are the sanctuary, history, and the Old Testament. So Jesus, as a priest, he is ministering in the sanctuary. As a king, Jesus is running and controlling everything that is happening in this world, in the great controversy on the earth. And as God, God's role is to create things from scratch. And so we notice that Revelation is taking the Old Testament in reverse order to restore things as it was at the beginning, using God's creative power to make all things new and to give back life to those who are dead. Now, think about the role of Christ, and also think about the roles of Satan, which is written in red letters. Whereas Jesus is, as a priest, he's trying to cleanse us from sin and defend us from sin. Satan, as a deceiver and a tempter, he is trying to tempt us into sin, to defile us. And then, when we fall into his temptation, he takes our case and brings it before the universe and before God. And he accuses us as sinners that should not be saved. Second, while Jesus, as a king, is in control of everything that happens in history, and he uses his authority to execute justice and righteousness in this world, Satan, as a prince of the world, and as the prince of air, and the prince ruler of the darkness of this world, he is trying to persecute and to bring suffering and pain into everyone that is born into this world. Thirdly, whereas God as a creator is restoring all things, is on his way to restore all things back to normal, back to its perfection, and back to life, Satan, as the originator of death, is trying to by bringing sin into the world, he is bringing death, which is the wage of sin. And so we see that the two powers are always at war against each other. And this has a message for us, because we see today sin and suffering and death all the time right here in our life. And that is our reality that you cannot deny. And even though we are not in a political persecution, we must admit that there still is persecution that is present in our life. There is guilt, and there is pain, and there is death. But the book of Revelation is presenting to us Jesus. And these three things are things that we as people cannot solve. Sin. Nobody can solve the problem of sin. There were many good men and good people and philosophers who were trying to deal with ethics, but they never got to the core of the problem. Only Jesus was able to came, and he provides the only solution to sin.
Amen.
And also, all the sufferings and the pain that we go through, it's actually completely under God's control. So we see that Jesus says, not a sparrow will fall to the ground without his permission. And thirdly, we always have the hope of resurrection. But it's not just at the individual level that people are experiencing and going through these things. It's also at the level of the church at large. As we saw at the beginning, in the historical background, the church is being persecuted and attacked by Satan. And it is not in a very good shape, because all the apostles, right now at the time that this book is being written, are martyred and they're all killed. And Paul also has been dead for many years. And John, the apostle, is the only person living at this moment. And yet he is sent to the island of Patmos just by himself, separated from all the churches. And so there's really nobody to look after the church at this time. So in this background of the sufferings and the persecution by Satan, this book of the prophecy was given to the church for a reason, for a good purpose. And notice what we just talked about. It shows that actually the book of Revelation, as it says in chapter 19, verse 10, it says the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus. And so that is what is being given to the church at this time. This picture is titled, you know this picture, right? It is the walk to Emmaus. And think about the walk to Emmaus. And you see there are the two disciples in this corner are walking with a person in white, which must be Jesus. And the disciples were very sad. It was the saddest day of their life. And they never before experienced any sadness like that in their life before. And it says that the disciples did not really notice or recognize who Jesus was, and that tells us that somehow that makes us think that while they were walking, they were just weeping all the way and just crying so that the tears were before their eyes so that they could not see Jesus. Of course, there may be a spiritual reason why they could not discern Jesus, but also physically they were not able to recognize Christ because of the tears, I think. And at this moment, Jesus joins the crowd. He joins the two disciples, and he starts to explain to them the prophecies. He says in Luke chapter 24, verse 27, and beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. And this prophecy is what revives their hearts. It lifts them up from their depression. And it says that their hearts, they say that as their hearts burned within them while Jesus was talking to them by the way. And so all they needed was an explanation to them about the scriptures and the prophecies. They didn't need anything else. It was just the Bible. And they didn't even need to see Jesus face to face with their eyes. That's not what they needed, but what they needed was to understand the prophecies concerning Jesus. And it says in Desire of Ages 796, but it was necessary for them to understand the witness borne to him by the types and prophecies of the Old Testament. Upon these, their faith must be established. Christ performed no miracle to convince them, but it was his first work to explain the scriptures. And it says, the miracles of Christ are a proof of his divinity, sure, but a stronger proof that he is the world's Redeemer is found in comparing the prophecies of the Old Testament with the history of the New. And what happened after they finally understood what Jesus was trying to explain to them? Jesus explained the same thing many times already. and yet they never understood or retained that information. But now, for a final time, Jesus is explaining the scriptures in a very clear way. And now they finally understand all that he's talking about. And as soon as they understand, they change the direction. They change the direction and turn back toward Jerusalem, away from Emmaus, and now they're starting to run. And you imagine, just imagine that this was now it is nighttime, and everything is dark, and you cannot see what is in front of you. And the road that they're traveling is covered with stones, with rocks, and they're sharp rocks, and yet it's dark, and now they are running back. They're not walking, but they are running at full speed toward Jerusalem. And lastly, think about what shoes they were wearing at this time. It's not like the nice shoes that we are wearing today. This is 1st century AD, and so they must be wearing sandals, where their feet and their toes are all exposed and open toward whatever comes striking at their feet and their toes. And so we can imagine that by the time they reach their destination, Jerusalem, their feet are covered with blood and their toenails broken and gone. And yet, they don't even feel their pain. Why? Because of the truth that they just learned, that gave them so much joy. And this was an overwhelming power for them, so that it was overwhelming over all the senses and the nerves. They could not feel what was going on except the truth. The truth only was captivating their attention. And so I hope that we also become diligent students of prophecy, so that in the same way that the disciples experienced the comforts that came by an intelligent understanding of the prophecies and the scriptures on which they based their faith, and not on emotions or experience, but they were able to base their faith and on the Word, on an intelligent understanding of the Word and the prophecies.
Amen.
And so there will come a time of need for all of us. There will come a time of need, and you are going to need an anchor and a base. And everything that you used to trust, the good things in your life, even people and your friends, your families, they can all fail you. And that's how things always are. But we need to prepare so that we have an anchor, a firm base on the scriptures, on the prophecies, and an intelligent understanding of what they are talking and revealing to us about Christ. And so as we close this time, I'd like for all of us to read together this last verse. It's found in Revelation chapter 1, verse 3. And I hope that this will become our experience every day that we live. Let's read together. Ready? Begin. Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand.